Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're here in YouTube, you'll see a little link down below, and you can click on it, and you'll end up in Zoom. If you're in Zoom, you can see another little link, and you'll click on it and end up in Mukana, and that is where you can ask questions, vote on questions, talk amongst yourselves during this meeting. So we'd love to have you come and join us in the conversation, and we'd love to have you on the panel. So if you look at all of this and you think, I could add something to this conversation, we'd love to have you. You have to get here, raise your digital hand at 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. By the way, that's when we also distribute the Discord link if you want to be part of this conversation ongoingly. Now, we open the doors around 6 a.m., so if you want to come in early and just see how your kit's working and whether you feel like you're really ready for the show, come in early. We're just chit-chatting. Feel free to interrupt us and say, how is my kit? Or how is my setup, or how is my mic? That is what we're there for. We just fill the rest of the time with idle chat. That is sometimes really interesting. So anyway, come in early. Also ask questions early. That makes it a lot easier for us to kind of pace ourselves during the show. On the first hour, we have general discussion. That is just whatever you want to talk about related to media and virtual production. In the second hour, we usually focus on something specific that we haven't covered before, or maybe we feel like we need to go back and cover. Today, we're going to talk about billing and budgeting. It's been one of the requests in our second hour, and just how we manage the business of what we do. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about the mix pre. A lot of us have the sound devices mix pre, and we've decided to kind of come together and have that discussion. Mickey's going to help with that, and we also have possibly some special guests coming to hang out with us and talk about it as well. Wednesday, last Wednesday, we did ruthless reviews and we looked at everybody's image. This Wednesday, we're going to look at everybody's actual setup. So for those of you who want to show off your setup or at least talk about your setup, Wednesday is going to be the day to do that. Thursday, we're going to talk about social media in general, how to build campaigns and how to work through those. That's been another strong request in our second hour. And then Friday, we're going to talk about storage. How we back things up, how we organize things within our systems, both online and on-premise. So we're going to talk about that on Friday. And then, of course, Saturday, we have education. And then we're going to be hanging out with Nick Justishin at 10 a.m., where we're going to be talking about Unreal again. And it's been, Nick has been very kind to hang out with us and push that along. And then at 5 o'clock, we have Matt in the kitchen. We are doing a show with Madeline Smithberg, and we're inviting all of you. You've seen us do some of the cooking tests, which have turned out pretty well. Like, we're starting to triangulate into something that's really interesting. And so we're going to have, we're going to be actually joining the show at 5 o'clock on Saturday. So it's a little bit of a break between Nick and that, so you can set up. So anyway, so that's what we've got coming up this week. And now it's time to jump into the questions, Bill.
Paul Wallace starts us off this morning with some words from Austin, Texas. What is Dan Humbler using for graphics with his Raspberry Pi, and more importantly, for a telestrator?
And he's not here.
So
he's not here.
We don't know. So we'll have to wait until Dan is actually on here to have that conversation. All right, next question.
Gabriel Lisuardo of Milan, Italy says, could the Dante AVIO Bluetooth adapter be used to bring a phone call into a show? Does it also allow send program audio back to the caller?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the I have one here. I'm just out of my reach, but it actually has 2 in, 2 out. So on the Dante, go ahead, Mickey.
Is it the one? Sorry, is it 2 channels going
Pretty
into
sure
the
it's 2
Bluetooth
channels.
device?
I'd have to open up my Dante.
From what I
controller.
recall, it's a single channel going to the Bluetooth device.
Go ahead, Jeff.
It's two into Dante from the Bluetooth, and it's 1 return.
I could have
So it
sworn.
will allow you to play stereo music from your device, but it'll only send 1 back. And it uses 2 different profiles, one for music, and then it uses, that's the A2DP, and then it uses HFP for phone calls. And it is restricted to 48 kilohertz, so you cannot use it with a Dante system that's at 44.1 or 96. And that also goes for the USB-C and USB-A Dante devices. They're restricted to 48K.
There you go. So yes. Next question with more with more detail and better detail than I had. All right, next question.
Our friend Alex Goldner from London says today is the 10th anniversary of the announcement of Final Cut Pro 10 in 2011. If Apple had $10 million to share between adding new features and new ways of marketing Final Cut, how would you distribute the money?
Go ahead, Felipe.
Marketing. We don't see marketing coming from Apple for Pro applications. Of course, there's one thing that is hard for them is because they are applications they sell through the App Store, and maybe there is a reason why they are not marketing that, because they could be in a more advantageous position as other applications they would compete with. Who knows? I would put more money in marketing, training, providing training coming from Apple for their applications. This would show a little bit more to the common person that they have our backs on that. Even though we know they do.
Sky and then Bill.
Well, because they make more money in a given hour on iTunes than they will ever make for the amount of ROI they would get from supporting a professional system. The people there that made this are amazing. This product is amazing, but it's a sheer economics issue. I mean, when you've got a complete revenue source on 99-cent apps being downloaded versus all of these but very particular creatives that would make demands, we're very demanding people.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, it's a little bit riffing on what Sky was just talking about. I've always thought that the biggest hassle with professional software development isn't really developing the software and promoting it, marketing it. It's supporting it. And as these things get more and more complex, in order to do really world-class support, you have to have teams that are gigantic, because you've got thousands upon thousands of people calling in every day wanting solutions to their unique circumstance in a complex ecosystem. It's very hard to do that kind of support. So I think they sell plenty of Final Cut to make it profitable and for them to be happy, but I don't think they want to turn it into a global software phenomenon.
Go ahead, Mickey.
AF output built in, and more universally compatible XML output, please. And thank you.
So Mickey says spend a whole $10 million on those two things. That's what he needs. Yeah, yep. Go ahead, Chris.
Historically, the Apple team has been very proud. The Apple Final Cut team has been very proud of the fact that they financially are completely self-sufficient. It's important to remember that the success of the phone does not bolster Final Cut. The success of Sky just said iTunes. I don't think anybody buys songs on iTunes anymore, but that's a nice analogy. It does not support Final Cut. Final Cut is completely self-sufficient, only based on the sales that they do, and they've sold many copies to support it. So they don't
talk about the numbers. The rumor is it's the second largest video editing tool in the world behind
iMovie, right?
so like it's second most used. So like let's be clear, like they may not be that public about it, but the installed base is much larger than Premiere or Avid. It's just not in Hollywood.
What's interesting is that
we keep on thinking about it as it isn't whatever, but when you talk about education, corporate, average folks, especially YouTube, TikTok. When we deal with, especially when we deal with social media creators whose business is social media, not social media creators thinking that they're going to someday go into production, but the social media creators their business is social media, all of them are using Final Cut. like I haven't seen any of them use anything else. They use Premiere and Resolve because somewhere in the back of their head, the ones that do, they're going to end up in Hollywood working on a movie. And so they want to learn how to do it that way. But when we talk about people who just need to get it done, I've dealt with, I only have my anecdotal evidence. It's not like I saw a poll. I just know that every social media person we've been asked to work with is using Final Cut for that, unless they have this Hollywood dream somewhere that they're going to be an editor. Go ahead, Roscoe and Jan.
Yeah, what makes an editor mature is the workflows that people develop around it. That was the big complaint when Final Cut Pro 7 went to Final Cut Pro 10, is people had built-in workflows and they couldn't easily transfer them over because a lot of the tools weren't mature. Final Cut Pro 10 is mature, so I don't think it really needs a lot more development. It probably just needs a little more marketing if they want to support it.
I think that, go ahead, Jan.
Just question, I don't know this. Does Final Cut Pro work on a Windows environment or solely on Mac?
Solely on Mac.
Well, then that might be something that they'd want to do.
Chance.
Not a chance.
Zero.
Well,
Zero chance. like minus 1,000. There's no way Apple would ever move it over. For a whole bunch of reasons. One is that they don't have to worry about copy protection because you got the biggest dongle in the world, which is the computer. So it makes it really fluid. Secondly, it means that they'd have to actually support the Windows architecture. And from anybody who's seen what happened with iTunes on Windows, Apple's never going there again. Like they won't do anything that unless they have to. iTunes was a disaster. Go ahead, Jeff.
This is my reminder whenever I get a chance. Final Cut is $299. If you are in education, student, or teacher, you can get all of the Apple Pro apps for $199. Logic, Main Stage, Compressor, Motion, Final Cut. $750 worth of apps. It's an amazing deal. Snap it up, and you'll have it forever.
And yeah, when did you? What do you have to pay on upgrades? I'm just curious, Jeff.
Absolutely
over like 10 years.
Nothing.
I think over 10 years it can be.
It was like zero.
Yeah, it's 10 times zero.
I think I bought it once, cry once, and that's it, right?
So
right?
If it was me, I would spend it almost all on development. I would. The thing that I think that everybody should be doing, but I think Apple would need to spend at least $10 million on, is integrating the tools, a marketplace, into Final Cut for tools and training, where I can see all the things that are available: Final Cut, Motion, Compressor. I can buy them from within the app, or even subscribe to them from within the app. The external tool architecture is just painful. Like I do it and I put up with it, but all the weird ways that people build plugins for Final Cut drive me absolutely crazy. And I would love to just know what's available. Like, say I'm looking for a keyer, and here are the 3 keyers that are available, and I can buy any one of them right from the app and have it install and run. I'm looking for training on that keyer or training on how to do this one thing. And it gives creators a place to just upload little snippets of things that you might cost you. Like if I was in the middle of production and I can't figure out how to use a tool, I would absolutely pay $1 or $2 or $5 for a little video on how to use that tool. And I would just buy it right there. So it's, just in time training, built into the app that would pop open. More importantly, one of the things that ZBrush did, which I thought was genius, was they would run the app. So the tutorial would it had a macro function, and you could stop it at any point and start working on your own. So it's not like a video. It was literally, it would just run along. And that being able to be done inside of the Apple apps would make a huge difference in that area. The next thing I would do is I'd open it up to 1 year of free. So here's a year of it. And then I would aggressively go after continually pushing folks like Mark and Steve to build training into that infrastructure. The thing I would focus on the most is basic training being super well built, not by Apple. I don't think Apple, this is going to be controversial. I don't think Apple can make good training. Like, I just don't think they can do it because there are so many layers of what the brand needs to look like that it just wrings out all of the quality. It's like bland vanilla, something that has no taste by the time it comes out the other. Not no taste. It's got tons of taste from a design perspective, but it doesn't have any flavor left. And so I think that you would engage other people to do that, for you. And the big thing is I would also set up something like this, what we do with office hours, but for Final Cut, and I would have that running every day. So people can come in and get constant constant input and constant figuring out what their questions are and challenges and process and everything else. And I think that would be a great way to expand their market. Go ahead, Roscoe, Guy, and then Paul. Then we'll move on.
2 things. Philip Hodges did this with intelligent assistants. It was just very difficult for him to keep all those little modules updated, and he had tons of them. And he and Greg put those together. And the second thing is there is a cost of upgrade. It's called an M1, a MacBook Pro 16. So there is a cost of upgrade for Final Cut.
Yep. Go ahead, Guy, and then Paul, real quick.
I was just thinking back about the time that I had to push a bunch of DVDs and CD-ROMs into the landfill when a new version of Final Cut came out. It was like a pallet full. And here's the new pricing structure with a 0 at the bottom for FCP upgrades. How about
that? Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I'm ready to enroll in the Alex Lindsay Advanced Institute for Media Studies so I can get my discount on Final Cut. It's not too far from the truth, Alex. You are an educational institution here.
I just want to say something. They've told me directly that they don't really vet too much. So if you homeschool, you are technically an educator, and so it's not that hard to do. You just have to do a little bit of work to get there. They're not trying to put the big parapet up between you and getting the software. That's all I'll say.
We'll work on the deal. All right, next question.
Moving on, Alan Scott of New Brunswick, Canada says, are there any outputs from the ATEM Mini switchers that could control a tally light?
Tucker?
Yeah, the ATEMs, any of the ATEMs that use their software control, which is all of them, have over Ethernet have tally functionality. So there's plenty of products out there, whether they're Arduino based or Unity Intercom will use that tally. There's a lot of solutions that will use it.
Next question.
Peter Rosado of Las Vegas says, Alex mentioned adapters for the new techrise. Are these pre-made with endpoints or just the plugs and we need to perform some sort of soldering?
There's no soldering, and of course, I don't see them here right now, but they appear to work fine. These are, but I need to test them a little bit more before I'm willing to commit to it. I just got Monoprice TS to TRS adapters, but I have to test on some of them, but I haven't tested on the actual techrise just because it was in another box, and so. Ask that question another day or two, and I'll have it tested because I have to test it on my end. I just want to make sure it doesn't just move the short up the field, to what we're having there. But it's basically a little adapter, and I had one. Hold on, I think I have one right here. This is it. It's still in its bag. This one, I had another one that I pulled out, but it's just TRS 1/8 inch with a TS input, and maybe I'll even test it before we get to the end of the hour because since it's all sitting right here. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, essentially what you want the adapter to do is to send the actual sleeve of the techrise port to only the sleeve of the microphone, because right now it's shorting the sleeve and the ring. That's
and Edwin had the best solution. Well, not maybe the best. This might be a less geeky solution. Edwin just unscrewed it and pulled the middle pin, like just pulled the connection to the middle pin, and then it works fine. So it's just that short that's going on. So we dealt with that last week. Next question.
Jason Robertshaw of Sarasota, Florida says, Alex put the fear of plugging my HDMI sources directly into the new ATEM Mini Extreme for fear of putting strain on the expensive to replace ports. Will a cheap HDMI patch panel from Monoprice be a good alternative? And he's looking for recommendations for a solution and notes the ATEM doesn't move, it stays in the control room.
If it's in a relatively safe place, I wouldn't worry too much about putting HDMI connections in. If you're constantly, it's just that if you're constantly moving things around, when I talk about strain and doing patch panels, it's usually on, in a venue where we're constantly plugging things in and out. If you are in a road environment, you may want to think about that, but I wouldn't worry about it too much on a day-to-day basis. Go ahead, Rupert.
I would just say if it's in a static environment, and even if it's on desk or something, you've got the cables trailing away, maybe down the back of the desk, just add some strain relief there so the weight or something, other movement doesn't pull on the unit.
Yeah, just definitely not having it. Think about anything pulling on any connector. And again, if you don't move it very much, it won't be a constant stress point either. Go ahead, Jeffrey, and then Tucker, and then Mickey.
Another thing I would do is if you have it on a table, those HDMI cables are up a little bit off the table and pulling down probably around the table. So if you're tying those cables together, another good thing to do is to have like a little shim piece of wood, like it's not even a 1x1, but something that you can slide right underneath those HDMI cables so they stay as level as possible right into the ATEM Mini Extreme.
Go ahead, Tucker, and then Mickey.
Yeah, it'd be nice if somebody would produce a 3D print that basically attaches to the bottom and extends out the back a little bit and has risers for all those plugs to support them. So you can do just zip tie slots, boom, done. On mobile rigs, we all typically put those little like short 6-inch male to female HDMIs just looping out the back. They stay attached and that goes in the case. That way you're not plugging and unplugging. So it's a good question.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I agree. If you're not moving around, there's no real need to have a patch panel. But if you do end up going that route, make sure all your connectors and cables are HDMI 2.1 so that you are future-proofing yourself.
Next question. We're gonna move on.
Moving on to Gabrielle Lasuardo of Milan, Italy. And Gabrielle, oops, that went off my screen, excuse me. I follow up on Bo Cordell's question to ask if Alex and the other office hours speakers are handling chroma keying with ATEM Minis or other hardware and software tools. Since the ATEM Mini is only 1080p, I wonder if it could be better to use Mimo Live OBS or vMix with a 4K input.
I will argue that the ATEM Mini's keyer is probably better than all of those, even if they were at 4K. It's a linear key. It's just a better keyer than they have. So even at 1080p, the ATEM Mini will look better. Now, I will say that the Constellation and some of the other 4K solutions that Blackmagic have look dramatically better at 4K because they're using the same keyer but with more resolution. And then the step up from there is the Ultimate 12, which you can key glass with a good lighting. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So those are the different levels, but I wouldn't consider the software. In addition to the fact that they'll probably put more pressure on your computer, I don't think that they're nearly as good. And the funny thing is, what the ATEM's doing is not very complicated, and they could easily build a great keyer. I mean, I used to build a green screen keyer. I can just tell you how easy it is to do. And we've even offered folks to, like, let me help you build a better keyer. And they're like, oh no, we have it all figured out. We have somebody who specializes in green screen. And you're like, okay, but they all stink right now. Next question.
Peter Moore, Auckland, New Zealand is back in, and this time he says, I'm currently using my ATEM Mini as a display computer monitor switcher. Under macOS, my second screen, an LG, is shown as a Blackmagic HDMI. I do have the LG profile, though. My question is, does the ATEM Mini pass through the actual monitor info to macOS? And
no.
That gets the end of the question.
Go, Tucker.
Yeah, no. It's you have sources and sinks in video, and the source is the computer. The sync that it sees and the EDID information that it's going to get is going to be directly from the Blackmagic. It has its acceptable resolutions and embedded audio and all the different configurations there. So that's one link. The next link is from the ATEM Mini to the actual display. The ATEM Mini doesn't really care about the EDID information. It just pushes whatever it pushes. So
the a KVM will do that kind of thing. So I have a Monoprice KVM that I've been testing that works pretty well, and it'll carry all that information with it. But it's really built for that, and it's about the same price as the base Mini, so a little less, but not a lot. Next question.
Next question comes from Bo Cordell, again from Charleston, South Carolina. Yesterday, Alex described his process for pulling the perfect green screen key using scopes. Could he explain again so I can take notes this time?
Oh, because we did it on a Sunday. Oh, I did something technical on a Sunday. Let's see here. We have a lot of questions, so I'm going to do this really fast. So you'll have to take notes because it'll go quickly. But what you want to think about is when you're doing a green screen, the green screen you really want, if you think about the green screen here, you really want the lighting both this way and this way to be as even as possible. When you think about the green screen location, we put the lights generally on either side. I will tell you that unless you really have a big production, don't show feet. Like, unless you have the money or time to do it, just cut people off at the knees. We do it, but we may only do it for a quick shot to establish it, then go right into doing the rest of your green screen without it, because it's really easy to key all the way down to the middle of the shin. It's really hard to key the rest of it. Feet, contact, shadows, everything else becomes this thing that either doesn't look very good or is really hard to do well. So if you think about this here, you have the green screen, and you want this to be even across. And so if you look at it from above, you'll think about the lights here. These are usually, for us, they're usually Kinoflow 4x4s because a large source is really useful. And we aim them to be like this pretty much, so that they're crossing, and then we find the kind of the happy medium here across that. Now we look at this, when we have this set up, you can see if we use green bulbs on here, that means that what we want is if we want to flag this so that it's flagged to the far corner, then we put our person here, on the other side of that flag. Then we light them completely separately. That's super important. Lighting them all at the same time is really a painful way to try to do a green screen, because you want the exposure to be correct here, and you want control of the exposure here. When we look at it, we have, if we think about 100 to 0 in our Luma, we want it to go at about 70 across, and we want that to be a thin line. The thicker this line is, the more you're going to give up, and we'll talk about that in a second, but the more you're going to give up in your key. So you want that going about 70. Now with green, that means that I have, if I look at the RGB parade, green will be at about 70, and then red and blue will be down here like this. And the reason that that's important is that we're going to, a linear key will merge these two and subtract it from here. So the greater the distance between these two, the better the key we're going to get. Now, so that's why RGB parade is so important, is looking at this delta. We want this delta to be at least 40 points if we can muster it. So those are the things that we're looking at in our green screen when we're putting it together. When you think about this when you think about the process, when the line going across is really thick, let's say it's 40 points thick, you want to think you have $256 or bits to work with. When this is 40 points thick going across here, like a real soft one, because you don't have, or if it goes like this, or it goes like this, in your scopes, you're basically paying, you're now at 216. And then when if your green and your red and your blue are closer to each other, this delta, or really this area here, is then subtracted. So this might be, let's say 50, and then this might be, let's say 40. And you're going to pull out another 90 from there. So you're at 226. And so, or 126. So you've now lost half of your color. And where you pay for that is right along here in the hair. Hair, small details, all of this stuff is the stuff, that's where you pay for it in a key. And that's what makes it look soft or edged, so on and so forth. And so, and remember that you're already losing kind of half your detail, because almost all of your video will be 422 unless you have a 444 processing pipeline, which is unusual. So you're really dealing now with, with a wide area with the red and the green close to each other. You might be dealing with 64 levels of gray to describe every option along this edge. And really, it's all about the edges. You want to figure out when you do green screen, how do I garbage matte this? And then how do I garbage matte this, so that I'm not thinking about it at all? And then I apply all of my key information, into here. And we used to do that in software. No one's doing that right now that I know of. But it makes it a lot easier to make that work. That's about as fast as I can describe a green screen key. So hopefully you took notes really quickly, and I apologize I did that on a Sunday. All right, next question.
John M. Gerard of Berkeley, California says, has anyone has gone to an external XLR mic to work with the iPhone 12 Pro Max with the latest iOS update? If yes, how do you have this connected? I can't get mine to be recognized as a USB device in iOS.
Go ahead, Mickey, and then Mickey? Sorry. Oh.
Yeah, so for Apple devices, it looks for a resistor tied between the ground pin and the microphone pin. If I recall correctly, it's somewhere between 200 to 2,000 ohms. And that is how Apple devices detect that whatever is plugged in there actually has a mic signal feeding into it. That being said, ideally use a proper audio interface that does the analog to digital conversion built in, and that interface has to be able to use the default core audio drivers, or use one of the IK multimedia or similar devices that just feeds analog in and has that resistor built in the line.
Good. Bill, real quick. Can't hear you.
Muted, Bill.
Oh, you're muted, Bill.
Thank you for unmuting it. Sorry, I didn't have enough buttons. I use a Ceramonic Lightning to XLR adapter. It is powered, has a little 9-volt battery in it, and it takes the levels and matches them beautifully. So XLR phantom-powered mic in there has a phantom power switch, and then Lightning into any iOS device. Works beautifully.
All right, go ahead, Jen. Did you have something? No. Next question.
Moving on, Guy Cochran of Seattle says, connected with Jim Hankins on LinkedIn. Love the way the AWS certifications appear on his profile or on a profile. How hard is it to get certified?
Jim?
It's not particularly easy. Amazon does provide a very good blueprint on what you need to study for. And I'd say probably 50% of the time would be using a third party, somebody like A Cloud Guru. And the rest is a lot of reading and a lot of practice, and just don't give up. The associate level ones are much easier than the professional ones, and practitioner is pretty simple, actually.
That's great. There you go. So hopefully more of us can get certified. Jim, do you find that the certifications make a difference for your clients?
Yes, but that wasn't really the original reason why I went off and got it. It was more of a peer appreciation than it was then. But it really just helps familiarize yourself and forces you to learn.
Yeah. Systematically get
so
through
much
everything.
out there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, thank you for that. It looks super impressive to me when I look at hundreds of resumes and look over candidates, and it just really stood out when I looked at it. And so I jumped over, I Googled it and looked at what it takes, and there is practice questions, and then they give you the answers as well. So I suggest anybody who's interested in this stuff to look at the practice sessions and look at the Q&A. There's a wealth of information just in those. If you quickly, you can read it in 5 minutes, and it's like, wow. So I suggest people go take a look at it.
Next question.
Tlaloc Lopez Waterman of New York says, Tucker Dragoo, what's the workflow and reason you use to use Tally with Unity Comms?
And we lost Tucker. So so Tucker's not here. He waved. I thought he was going to answer a question. So we'll see if we can bring that back. Yeah, go ahead, Sky.
Yes, I just talked with Tucker about that. Yes, he's very excited about answering those questions. Yes, I have an immediate need. And so, yes, that will be a subject we're all going to learn about.
Yep. Next question.
Jeff Francis of Columbia, South Carolina, and here in the panel says, favorite USB-C cable for ATEM Mini Pro models?
I'm trying to think of what I use. I don't know where my USB. It's one of those things they packaged with everything, so you don't know which one. I don't know which one I'm using. Go ahead, Jeffrey, and then Bill.
For a regular one, I don't have a favorite, but from time to time, I'll actually use my Oculus Quest fiber cable to go from my ATEM Mini to my OWC Mercury Dual, and it works really well. It's got 16 feet of cable on that.
Go ahead, Mickey, and then Bill.
Yeah, I have a bunch of I think it's called Pearstone, the house brand of B&H, and they work pretty well. And I also have dozens and dozens and dozens of USB-C cables that just came with hard drives, and
Right.
they work okay as well.
Yeah, the big thing is making sure you're getting full speed. So I always test my cables with a hard drive with a known speed. So I might know that the hard drive happens to do 900 a second or whatever, and I want to see something near that with the cable. If it's like 30, then it means it's power only. Bill?
One of the things I'm starting to look for on the Thunderbolt certified cables that are very high speed, there will be a little lightning bolt thing and a number. And if you get Thunderbolt 3 certified cables, they should be maxed out and you should be able to use them for anything. That's all I'm buying now.
Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to agree with all that stuff. I found one called a Fazgear on Amazon. It's been really great, but really, like you said, it's got to make sure you're getting ones that are full speed. And I think when they were first starting to go to this format, there were some problems with stuff that was coming with gear, especially with phones that was power only or power and 480, whatever. So there's been some issues with that.
Roscoe, real quick, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, Condor Blue was recommended to me a long time ago. B&H carries them. They're very good, and they come in shorts for if you need them from a camera to a hard drive.
That's great. Next question.
Paul Wallace of Austin, Texas says, where does the name PXC Labs come from? PXC or PCX?
PXC. It's just my sandbox. So it's a sandbox that's been there for a long time. So it's just what we call just us messing around with code. So it's just always where we put stuff. That's next question.
Philip Oler of Katona, New York says, I need to record 2 people in a Zoom meeting. Account creating meeting is a paid account, but not my account. How can I ensure the best possible quality to pin and record participants?
You have to make sure that account has made the request. Well, I guess the first step would be to have a room either, or a portal or other things join it to make sure you get 720p. So that would be the step 1 to get 720. Otherwise, you'd have to request that the meeting be made a 1080p meeting. I mean, you have that FAR account would have to be would have to request that, and that can't be done quickly. Matt?
Ultimately, I think, Alex, also the question is whether they're wanting to screen scrape or they're wanting to have Zoom do that recording also, because Zoom will limit out at a certain amount of recording, where if you're screen scraping, you have at least have some ideas on that back end.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, well, a lot of people here do is fire up a Zoom room and pin one or have multiple monitors and pin individual people on separate monitors and record those via hardware or software.
And we do it with an individual connection for each person, because so it's a room that we kind of do a mix minus between the rooms, and that way we get isolated audio and video. Go ahead, Bill.
For a while, I was thinking, oh gosh, screen scrape's a lower resolution thing. It's going to be bad. But I've been surprised. On just a 16-inch MacBook Pro, screen scraping has yielded some really excellent, and I'm just using QuickTime Player to record the screens. I'm doing it for commercial clients, and they've been delighted with the quality. So it doesn't necessarily have to be bad anymore. Don't be afraid of doing screen scrapes.
Next question.
Ken Jones in Seattle says, education is a wonderful thing. What's the difference between rendering lag and encoding lag?
Rendering lag is usually pushing the video to the screen, and encoding is pushing the video to the internet. So, and they're 2 different processes, because it has to process all of the layers and produce a final output, which can just go out of the HDMI or go to the screen. And so it's rendering to the screen, or it's rendering out to that. And that's one layer of what it needs to do. It then needs to take that finished piece and push it to the internet. And those are 2 entirely different processes. And oftentimes when they're done on the same computer, it doesn't do it very well. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, rendering is traditionally the word used in post-production when you would, as you say, composite multiple layers down into a single channel. And what's been interesting over the last decades or 2 is, where do they make that horsepower work? Is it in the GPU, the graphics processing unit, or the CPU? And that's why I'm very interested in the M1, if they've combined and homogenized those, because we used to have multiple different chipsets to do multiple different tasks. And if they're combining all of that into one, woo.
Most modern video engines work in GPU, and for the most part, encoding happens in the CPU now, although some do GPU as well. So, and some of them have specialized chips to do the compression to H.264, like Razer, I think some of them, or some of the will have their own H.264 chips built in just to do the thing. And so those are a couple different options.
Red had their own chipset for the longest time too.
Right. Next question.
Moving on.
We're behind. We got to move fast.
Jeff Francis, Columbia, South Carolina, and the panel. Amazon has a plethora of inexpensive 15-inch portable monitors that have both HDMI and USB-C. Does anyone have a favorite that will work at 30 frames per second to use as a multi-view for an ATEM Mini Pro?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I've gone through a whole bunch of them. Lapao seems to be the one that I like a lot. I also, ViewSonic also has some, because they also have touchscreen models and regular models, so you can check those out. They're a little bit more expensive. Other than that, Azai, AUZAI, is another model that works really well, and I think I'll stop.
Go ahead, Jan.
I just bought the Lapao 16-inch monitor. It's really, really nice. And if you're going to buy it on Amazon, they have a bunch in the refurbished store, and that's one I bought, and it's really excellent. You can't tell that it's been used.
The ones we use are a little smaller when we have like little miniature kits, and those have been a lot of the Lilliput 10 inches. They're not incredible as far as color or brightness, but they're inexpensive and rugged, and we've used a lot of them for that. Next question.
Michael Marsh of San Anselmo, California. Has anyone else seen frame tearing on the Raspberry Pi? Sluggish motion too, evident in-camera movement. Is this VLC, the 4 gigabytes of RAM, or is there a setting I can change?
Go ahead, Stuart.
I thought I saw Jonas here before, but I can actually bring up an example of this while we're sitting here. I'm just going to
need to move really fast.
Screen. Yep, this is the output of my Raspberry
We're seeing
Pi.
black.
I'm just hitting play. Oh, hang on. Let me just hit a video that I own the copyright for. There we go. Now you see how one came up faster than the other. The one on the left is the output from the browser. The one on the right is via a NewTek Spark. And you can see the NewTek Spark's on the HDMI, and you will see tearing. Jonas has already mentioned that he knows about it and is working on a fix on that. But I would suggest to anyone who wants to grab the browser output into OBS or into vMix, and it is absolutely clear. And there is also a difference in the audio level. The browser level is lower than what the HDMI level is.
Yeah, there's definitely some tearing that's going on with complex frames and things like zooms and fast movement. That's where you're going to see it. And I think that Jonas was blaming the Chromium process on what was happening. I think he's working around it. Next question.
Looks like Jessica Lopez Barkey of is it Kamlasha Lake, New York. I know Alex isn't interested in the best of Sizzle, but I'm wondering if the best of playlist could be made. For those of us in education, I think it would be enormously useful, as we can't attend every day and I have fear of missing out. When I can't come, then I hear that something cool has happened.
It's hard because some of the cool stuff is like an hour long. Like the Raspberry Pi builds and the cooking things are I would definitely, if you have time, put them on. If you're having tea or something, you want to take a look at them. But it's we're working on being able to put some playlists together that will give you kind of some short pieces that we think are highlights. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, I was actually thinking of the word sizzle this morning, and you talk about the word protein, and the sizzle is a metaphor for the smell, not the steak itself. And so a highlight reel.
You have to get to the point really fast. We're like
sizzle
deep in questions.
is only a small bit, but it's not the full meal. There you go.
Yeah. I think that we just need to we're working on finding ways to provide something more concise. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Discord parses it out, and so really Discord is your best tool at that point in time.
Yep, absolutely. Next question.
Jan Landy in Las Vegas is in with, this is for Alex Lindsay in regard to Mukana. Have you ever considered to allow us to load images into Mukana to ask us in clarifying our questions? As they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words.
Yeah, we're not secure enough to do that yet. It's not that we'll never do it. In fact, we'll probably eventually let you upload movies. But it's going to have to, they're an entirely different structure of the social web network of Mukana has to change before we do that. Otherwise, people can put up inappropriate stuff that wouldn't work for us. So there's it's not that I haven't thought about it or that I'm not interested. It's just that we would have to build something different, which we are working on. Let's go to the next question.
Sam Greenwood in Toronto says, has anyone used Monoprice studio lights? If so, are they any good?
I have not. They seem to be getting into anything, anything that they can. They have AV receivers. They have these really high end AVRs. It's a fascinating company. Next question.
Jonas Dattel of Reitlingen, Germany. Has someone used Resolve's clone tool to clone footage to a mounted S3 instance as a backup?
I have not. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, I use Copy Carbon Cloner. I just find it works for me. So,
well, to move to S3?
Oh, not to move to S3. No, up on the cloud. No, I do. Dropbox.
I think that I would probably be hesitant to. I would be hesitant to do that directly to S3. I'd probably do it to a drive and then push it. Go ahead, Felipe.
Yeah, just the only thing to keep in mind also is the amount of API calls that might end up happening the way that DaVinci's copy. It's a thing to be tested there.
A slower write speed can cause all kinds of instabilities, and especially if that write speed changes dramatically over time, could really screw. In my head, it doesn't work. It could, but I would be more likely to go to the drive and then push it from the drive to S3. Next question.
Morten Norheim in Norway says, true low latency wireless HDMI SDI. Any recommendations except for Teradek?
Oh, somebody had a hard time with Teradek. So does anyone have any specific recommendations other than Teradek? Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I've been seeing a bunch of Vaxis units fly out the door. I haven't tested them myself, but we were using the Hollylands, and they're similar, and those ones are right up there with the Teradek bolts. We were even surprised that it was going through cinder block walls in our facility. Like, that's amazing that it'll, I don't know, I guess go around, because I don't see how it would go through, but it's like a couple, not even a frame, I think, of latency. It was just super quick. Like, you could snap and it was right there. So I'd look at those Vaxis, and they're super cheap compared to the Teradek.
Matt?
Yeah, I'm going to echo Guy on that. I've been using the Hollyland, and it's been pretty rock solid. And it's nice because you can set a little bit of latency in the menu too, if you need lower latency versus better quality.
That's great. Mickey?
Yeah, it was mentioned by Guy, Hollyland.
Yep. Next question.
Jan Landy in Las Vegas, and here on the panel, whenever I buy a new cable, they come with a plastic covering on both ends of the plugs. Does anybody keep those plastic pieces and store their cables with them on? And if not, why do the manufacturers even ship them with the cables?
Go ahead, Doug.
My cats love them.
but do they eat them? That's the question. Do they eat them?
No, they just bat them around.
Just bat them around? Okay.
They're all over the house.
Yeah. I don't keep them, but I think that it seems like a good practice that I just don't follow. All right, next question. But I don't think any of us do. Next question.
Jan Landy has a couple more in here. The first one, I'm planning on selling some of my stuff on eBay, and I have not used it in years. What software and recommendations and techniques would the panel recommend?
Go ahead, Rupert.
There are some external softwares, but if you're going to use the eBay site directly, and you have got a login that you used before, maybe you bought and sold stuff, try and use that same account, because it may have some feedback or some credibility built in with it. Try and be comprehensive with your images and your descriptions. Stick to PayPal as a payment method. That will give the buyer the most confidence. And be careful of your shipping weights. Use track shipping, and just pack things carefully.
It's really hard to get into eBay, I find. like it's, because you don't have any track history. And the one thing to be super careful of that we found was to make sure that you absolutely get it out the day that they order it, and you absolutely get it. You want that rating is super. Every rating at the beginning is incredibly important, because you have to see. I mean, as a buyer, I don't buy that much on eBay because I have a lot of trouble as a buyer buying it. But if I don't see 95%, and oftentimes now 99% rating, I won't even bother. Go ahead, Jen.
Are there any applications that you could use, or do the panel recommend I go directly through the eBay interface?
Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Since you're local, I would just, in Las Vegas, a pretty big town, I would have somebody else handle it for you, because somebody like me who does this stuff all the time does invest in the software. Like, I mean, my profile, I have 21,343 feedback at 100%. So, I mean, I've done a few transactions. So I would let somebody else handle it for you, because it's not worth the time and effort to set it up with a high energy tool. Like, we use NetSuite, and it's $100,000 software. So you probably don't want to make that kind of investment. I'd let somebody else do it for you and give them the commission. There's local people that'll handle it all for you, and they have this kind of setup. We do it for people, but I'm not doing it as much anymore. We'll take like trade-ins, and like somebody wants a 6K, versus a 6K Pro. We'll take the old 6K and throw it up on eBay and, unload it for them. It just makes it easier, especially like electro stuff and high-end audio equipment.
Next question.
Jan Landy is back again with, thanks to Ken's excellent recommendation, I just received an Aputure MC. I can see the lighting change when I change the settings, but I'm unfamiliar with the terms CCT and HSI. Can the panel explain to me the meaning and what are the best settings to use for office hours?
Silence. Yeah, go ahead, Guy, and then Mickey.
The HSI is going to be the hue and saturation, and the CCT is going to be the color temperature. So you can do kelvins in the CCT, and HSI is going to be 0 to 360, I believe, on the value, or is it 255? One of the two on the MC. So color and saturation, hue, saturation, and then color temperature.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, well, exactly what Guy said. So for your key lights and whatever will affect your skin tone, typically you'd want to stick to CCT, so that you're either on daylight or tungsten. And then if you want to add colorful effects in your background, then you can use HSI.
Next question.
Jan Landy's last one from this sequence. I just read that Microsoft is buying Nuance AI for $16 billion. What will that purchase mean to us?
Teams will get better at their text speech to text, most likely. Paul.
I think it'll mean that the different systems like Amazon and Google and all those will start talking to each other, because Nuance does work for a bunch of those different companies.
Yeah, I doubt. We'll see.
I think it's going to happen, Alex. I think they're going to start talking to each other. Alexa's going to start talking to Google and so on. They'll have conversations. You can just
exactly.
set them on
they've
the
already
table
done that.
and they'll
They've already
talk to
had
each other.
conversations. If you've ever seen that one, you search for the Google Home device and the Amazon device, someone got them going in a cascade where they just keep on asking questions back, and they keep on talking to each other back and
They'll
forth.
never stop. They'll never quit.
Yeah, but I think that I doubt Microsoft's buying it to make it more interoperable. This is not really their pattern. Jeffrey and then Stuart, real quick.
Yeah, Nuance has been around forever, so they probably have a bunch of patents that they got collected with it. And of course, Nuance is being used in a lot of healthcare stuff, which Microsoft is working on getting or continuing to get into. So they're just expanding, and they probably made the most sense at that.
Yeah, go ahead, Stuart.
It'll mean that Windows 12 will include a distributed computing module that will enable Skynet via Microsoft.
There you go. Yeah, what's interesting about it is Nuance really just packaged up all of the people that made different kinds of software over the last couple of years. So they just collected all of it and then packaged it all up and sold it to Microsoft, which I'm sure was the business plan, almost probably from the beginning. And so it was well played process. Next question.
They can have a funeral for Cortana now.
There you go. Next question. I doubt that they're replacing Cortana. I have a feeling that they are just because Microsoft's speech to text is some of the best. I mean, Google and Microsoft are way out in front of everybody else. So this just adds, it's both a defensive move that keeps other people from buying it, as well as an offensive move where if they incorporate what they already have with that, they'll do well. Next question.
Panelist Stuart Fairweather in Melbourne says, anyone know of a way to trigger a speed light that will wait for a Genlock signal to fire in time with a Cine camera?
Go ahead, Bill.
I don't think anybody has come anywhere close to the kind of sync speeds required for actual flash photography on these cinema cameras. It's my one disappointment with all these amazing cameras that do frame grabs. They can't work like a still DSLR with sync at 1,000th or even 1/10,000th. It's not there.
Go ahead, Mickey, and then Stuart, real quick.
I'm not familiar of solutions specifically taking the signal or the trigger from Genlock, but I know with the Phantom cameras, you are able to get a GPIO output that could trigger a relay, and you could somehow feed that into the speedlight. Though for that, not any cinema camera can do it.
Yeah, go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, just for Bill, there's a whole heap of fashion photographers who use reds with natural lighting to do fashion photography because the Cine DNG files, the Scion can be used for the same thing, but I want to be able to trigger some flash photography with it.
And that's just it. Continuous light, it would work fine.
The H1 behind me. Yeah, but the H1 behind me can trigger a flash. So I'm hoping I can get a signal out of that into the Genlock input of the Scion, maybe. But I need to find a flash that'll work with the camera.
But the thing is, if you got a dancer moving across the stage quickly, how would you know where they're going to freeze if you don't have complete time sync?
Firing the flash from that.
Next question.
Hazmat Kajar says, Cape Town, South Africa.
This is just a note. He just inserted the corn fritter step by step, but we don't accept Bitly as well as images into the into Mukana. So,
all right.
But it's in Discord. Next question.
Moving along, Kerry Kadoke, Toronto. Is there any way to get a clean feed out of a DJI Mimo app? I have an Osmo 3 and would like to be able to use the tracking feature while streaming.
I don't know of any way to do it. It's actually not being able to get a clean feed out is why I don't use the Osmo app. so I think there's I haven't used it for a long time because we couldn't get a clean feed out. It seems like it's definitely possible, given that I mostly use Filmic Pro for that because it'll always put that out there. But I don't think that they have a clean feed solution. Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, I was going to say Filmic is great. The only thing is that I don't think you can use the tracking feature of the software unless you're actually using the software. And
yeah, you're right.
That's the key missing link.
No, I agree. It's a feature they should probably add, to the process. But you're either clean feed seems like an obvious one, but they're probably not thinking about using their app in a live environment, and so it's just a matter of enough pressure on them to add that little feature, which I'm sure is not that difficult, given that Filmic Pro figured out how to do it. I'm sure it's some kind of switch in the API. Next question.
Mitch Jacobson of New York City with our last one. Is there a solution to use voice recognition for closed captioning that translates to foreign languages live?
Yes. Well, yes and no. So Google, you can do a variety of different things, and there's a bunch of different software that will do things like this. So EEG has one I think called Falcon, and it'll do some of those bits and pieces for you. The challenge, you just always have to manage your expectations of what AI-based captioning is going to look like. AI-based captioning will not be incredible, especially if the audio isn't perfect. It will not be incredible for English, and then when you translate it, it will be less incredible than that was. So you want to always keep in mind when you manage clients' expectation. By the time you get an AI speech to text and then convert it to another language, they'll get the viewer will get a gist of what's being said, but it will not be as good as it will not be every word. And what you'll end up with is clients that come back and complain that they said this the wrong way, or this isn't the way you say that word, or it wasn't supposed to be dinosaur in my case. So there's lots of things that can be you just have to be careful when you offer that as a service. If you're just doing it to kind of understand what's going on, it works great. And Google does a pretty good job of it. I think Google and Microsoft's tools will let you just select what language you want to see it in, and it will work. You just have to understand that, again, and Google's probably one of the best. They're in their Meet platform, and that's what Leland showed about just cutting that out and putting it on the bottom. But as far as text generation, Google has back-end API tools that other translation services do. So you stream it to them and they'll give you 8 languages back in text. So those are all there. It's just that you just always want to know that it's great as a communication tool, making it available for someone who doesn't speak the language to understand basically what's being said. It's not precise. And that's always the thing that we have to educate our partners with. Next question.
I think that's. Oh no, we did have some more coming.
We had a couple more that leaked in there.
Yeah, Michael Vosspien of Woodstock, Georgia, and Michael says, in working with students, what do you consider minimal up and download speeds for attending Zoom meetings?
The 720 is 3.25 megabits per second, and the 1080 is 6.5 megabits per second, according to my measurements that I do. So those are it depends on what you're doing. Remember that if you're doing a 1080p, it expects everyone to be able to get that down as well. So anyway, that's the thing to kind of keep in mind in that process, that if you have a lot of people with low bandwidth, setting your meeting at 1080p makes it actually harder for them to watch the show. So I would always, minimum, I would say 50% more than that. So 5 megs a second probably for up, and down is probably bare minimum. Jeff?
Most residential is asymmetric, so you get more down than you do up. So it depends on whether you're going to want your students to have their cameras on. If you don't, then their upload requirements are less.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing is, I would recommend everyone right now call their cable company and say, I'm thinking of switching. Figure out who you could switch to. Tell them that you're thinking of switching and find out if there's any better options in their area before you make that decision. That's the discussion you want to have. You want to talk to the retention. I don't know what they call it. You can search for it, but it's like retention officer or something like that. We did that recently, and we went from 275 down, 10 up to 35 up and 1 gig down. And it cost us $30 less a month. So like we just did that. It was like magic. The reason is there's a lot of competition coming between Elon Musk and 5G. And the deal is they'll want a longer contract. They're trying to hang on to. They're just trying to hang on to everyone because everyone's getting antsy because of the bandwidth. So it's a good time to ask for a better deal. Next question.
And Vincent Alvarez of Bellingham, Washington says 60 Minutes had the Secretary of the Treasury video conference with an iMac-looking Cisco DX80. Anyone have experience with that system? Just curious. Boy, that does look like an iMac.
The systems aren't bad, as a point to point. If you have the infrastructure to do it, I mean, you need to make sure there's a receiver end of that as well that ties in. I think that it's 1080p, and I think that it's actually Cisco makes actually relatively good cameras. They had a great camera, the Precision HD, which I think may be similar to the one that's there. Does it say what the chip size is on the thing? But it's pretty good. Do they just say HD or do they say 10?
I don't see a chip size in here. This is just a review, 23-inch, high-quality monitor, high-performance whiteboarding.
Do they have any like a spec?
I don't see it.
No spec
back.
button?
They used to be prohibitively expensive, though.
They're expensive.
It does say 1920 by 1080, but it just says that's the transfer resolution. It doesn't say the chip size.
If they use what they had in the past, yeah, $2,300. But again, for people who do this all the time, it's not necessarily a bad solution. All things are. If it's using the same chipset that they were using with the Precision, it'll look at 1080p. It'll look really good. It was a 1-inch chip, so it could look actually exceptionally good to do that. It's just that it's a heavy piece of hardware to put there and not very. With the f2.2, see, and one of the things you're going to notice is that they're going for a much closer frame, and I think Cisco is, in this case, ahead of everybody else of tightening up that field of view. They're at 63 degrees rather than the 75, 80, 90 that a lot of other people are shooting for. And I think it's much better for people who are talking because it's a closer headshot. You actually have to worry about less behind you. So it's actually a pretty good approach to it. The problem is it's going to be very limited. It's a video conferencing. You can get on it and talk about it. You can kind of share things, but all the things that we do that are much more advanced, you can't really do inside of that. So that's the limitation there. Go ahead, Jeffrey, real quick, and then Guy.
It looks like the real only downfall, and we wouldn't use this, is it's Bluetooth 3.0 rather than at least 4.0. So that's kind of interesting.
I don't know if it makes a significant difference. Given the user base, would probably not know the difference, but yeah. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, that same kind of look, $599 for a D10 ME that works with Zoom. So if you're looking for something in that same,
and that has a built-in camera.
Built-in camera, built-in mic, built-in speakers, and then it acts as a second monitor when you're not using it.
Chip size on the camera?
I'd have to go dig.
I'm going to guess it's 1/2.3 or 1/2.6.
Let's see, camera system, 3-camera array. That's all the information that they have. They don't have chip size in there.
It's probably because it's really small. So, I mean, resolution is, you can say resolution, but I'd love to put them up against each other and see which one looks better, and so for the folks that are buying that Cisco, I bet you they want it to look better than a really small chip. So that's my guess. Anyway, next question.
Yeah, I saw Morten Norheim's from Norway, and I thought it was the wrong tag, but it's not. What is your preferred budget option for in-ear monitors for several people?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Probably you look at the Shure SE 215 or the Sennheiser IE40. There's also the Atmotec ER2. Those are all, I think, sub $100 in-ear monitors.
Go ahead, Guy, and then Jeffrey.
Yeah, I'm using those IE40 Pros, but they just came out with a newer model, so these ones have been replaced and they're $99. So I like these. I don't know if that's over the budget or not, but I've been really happy with these ones, and I guess they've improved them. The other thing to note on these is that they're high efficiency, so meaning the ohm rate is really low. So like when Alex went to use the Rode Go's as in-ear monitors, sometimes if you use headphones that have large coils, large magnets, they're going to soak up all of that energy, so to speak, and so you won't hear very much output. So these are super efficient, and so things will appear louder inside of these.
Go ahead, Jeffrey, and then Rupert.
There's several low-cost options on Amazon that you can find, including that ones that are basically stereo headphones that come with detachable buds that you can put on different cables and use it that way. So you could tuck one ear in the back of your shirt and the other one around your ear. Could work as well, depending on your budget.
If you're for a single in-ear, we use a lot of the autos, or just if you're just looking for a communication, not actual listening to music. Rupert?
If you've got several people in a wired environment, then you can get one of these little distribution amplifiers, so you can set it to the different types of headsets or different people's preferences.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. We have made it to the bottom of those questions. That was the producers put us under a lot of pressure there with a very large number of questions. Well done. It keeps us moving fast. We're still getting our wits about us as panelists to keep up with that, with the new norm of being able to be pretty much to the point on most of the stuff. So now we are going to talk about billing. This was a request inside of it for second hour, and I think that regardless of how much some of us don't like dealing with it, jobs don't get done without it. So we have to figure out how we're going, when jobs get done, they just don't get paid for without understanding how we're going to do budgeting and billing. So I guess the question to the panel is, how do you approach it? First, let's talk about budgeting. How do you approach budgeting your job? Do you work in inside of QuickBooks, or do you do it inside of a spreadsheet? I know that for me, just raise your hand if you have things you want to talk about there. For me, I do everything in numbers. Numbers is not something that you could run a company on. Like, if you're trying to import massive amounts of data from ERP, or, doing something that's crazy heavy calculations, it could be a little slow doing that. For budgets, it's kind of magical. So if you're on the Mac, it is so much easier to format and move and look pretty. So if you want to literally just show the spreadsheet that you have to your client, it's just easier to look good really fast. You're not limited to cells. You can create white space, and for me, white space is important. So I tend to use numbers for it, and I break my sections up into pre-production, generally production equipment, and then there'll be other things, specials that are required for that. So that's kind of how I realize I don't have a budget that I can just open up and show. I don't have like an Acme type budget that I can open up with without getting myself into a lot of trouble. But that's how I kind of, at least how I begin. Go ahead, Sky, and then Bill.
Well, attitude coming from years of being an employee is the attitude of being the entrepreneur and being the business owner. I'm learning a lot from those that have gone before me. Because if I'm just sitting back and waiting for somebody else to make the decisions for me, then I'm just going to be sitting back a lot. But to have those categories is critical for me. And I'm learning the business of the business.
I mean, one of the things,
I'm in it for the fun, but it needs to be paid for.
There's a couple things that I focus on, is that there always has to be some, think about how much pre-production has to get done for your project if you have pre-production, and then really think about it. The big thing with budget is you're building the whole show. Budgets for me take a long time because I'm building the show. Like, what do I have to do next, and how do I have to do this, and what do I have to do here? And then I always charge for equipment because I paid for it. Like I charge market rate, and usually I give a little bit of a discount under market rate, so that if someone wanted to rent the equipment instead of going from me, they'd pay a surplus on it. But I don't give it away. It's how you have great equipment, is to make sure that it's actually a revenue source. I learned that at ILM. They charge for the processing time, and so there was a whole thing that would calculate processing time on the computers, and the computers were always well maintained because of that. And so I think that's really important. I think another thing is if you have external vendors, is that you need to talk to them before you submit the budget, which sometimes I can't do because we get asked to do something in a rush. But know that you really want to talk through it with them and get the real number from them before you give it to the client, because you may have missed something that they'll know. Go ahead, Bill.
So I pulled out some old budgeting stuff that I've used. I have a series of files in FileMaker Pro that does most of this, and I have a two-stage process. And here's one of my old ones that I sanitized so it doesn't have anything too scary in it. After the title stuff, you can see that the top part of that is really just above the line. That means it's fixed cost. It's things like insurance, talent, music, things that you pay for once, and that's it, whatever that number turns out to be. And this is a live document. So as I put numbers into it, it calculates the extensions over on the right. Then there's a whole section for production, and this is where I can go in and put in how many things, what are the things, how many days will they be used, what is the unit cost if it does all the extensions. Behind the scenes, there is also a little bit of math that puts in what I call a contingency fee, and that's disclosed in the mice type at the bottom of the thing, which says I'm going to take 4% of this figure and pop it on top of it. And that is for expendables, just little tiny things that you mistake, because budgets, I need to always come in under my quote, whatever it is. There's some post-production down there, and then a special charges detail for the things that are a little bit unusual that might happen. Now, I do this for myself. A client never sees this. I want to get a sense of, if I'm there for that many days with these pieces of gear, what are the things that I want to make sure I have covered. When it actually comes time for me to send something to a client, I have a whole different form, and that is this, and this is my quotation. And they're going to get, this is the thing, it's happening. Here are the specifications that broadly outline what it's going to take to get it done. Here's what the price includes. Here is the quote, and that's it. And then any terms that go into there. That is what they get. And then we talk about it. And if somebody in the process says, I need details, I can pull out around a conference table my production estimate and go line by line. I hate giving production estimates to clients because that's where the accountants just nickel and dime you and say, can we get by with this? But it's also a tool where I said, if they say, I can't do that number. Let's say I came in at 20,000. Say, what can you do for me for 15,000? I pull out the production estimate and say, let's look. How many hours, how many pieces of equipment, how many days, what do you want to adjust to get that number down? In decades of using this two-part system, I have never had a job mess up because I really underbid it grossly. So it's super important to do your budget in some kind of something that looks like a spreadsheet or some kind of calculator, because you just always either you think things are too expensive or mostly you think things are less expensive. So you think, oh, that'll only be this, and until you actually wind it out, you don't really know. And it's almost always more expensive than you thought it was going to be. The one thing, we'll talk about billing next. Chris and then Mickey.
Really, the only difference between somebody who's doing $5,000 and $10,000 jobs and somebody who's doing $250,000 or $100 million jobs is one of those people is willing to put a bigger number on a piece of paper when it comes time to pitching something. And I always tell people that the most important thing is to really absolutely understand your hard cost of being in business. And it really kind of starts with, how much does it cost to be you? How much does it cost to be Alex Lindsay or Chris Fenwick or something? And you need to know those things, because the last question I never once ask it is, oh, so what's your budget? Like, I don't care what your budget is. You tell me what you want, and then I will tell you what that costs, and I can do that with confidence because I know how much it costs to be me. And if you can't do it, you know, maybe there's something else you want. But I'm not. I always tell people, I think I've said this to Doug a couple of times, go to the grocery store, put a bunch of stuff on the conveyor belt. And when she rings it up and says, so that'll be $127.15, say, I tell you what, I got $80 cash in my pocket. What do you say we call it even? Try that once. And then tell me why that grocer should be treated differently than you should in your business.
I love that. That's awesome.
And that's precisely what the production estimate does for me. Say, okay, what do you want to take off the conveyor belt?
Well, and the issue is that I just had one. I had a client, or a potential client, that came in and said, I came in at a number and they wanted to be about 60% of that number. And I said, so what do we want to take out? I don't want to take anything out. I just want to be 60%, 40% less. Like, and they literally said that.
You called the wrong guy.
And we kept on talking, but we were done. You know, like I was like, you know, like I'm not interested in this client. You know, like and it's, you know, saying that like that, a client like that, I was just like, that's a client that's going to take me to the ringer. You know, like they're just going to, and
every time for the rest of your relationship. It's
just not worth it. It's not, like, life's too short. You know.
I'll also say about Bill's spreadsheet, or any spreadsheet, be really careful that as you're editing and stuff, that you're not destroying any of your formulas. Because you could get really comfortable just looking down at the bottom, going, yeah, that'll be $8,000, and all of a sudden, this thing got deleted out of the formula.
In numbers, I constantly tap on all of my calculations to make sure that they're hitting all of the things, because I've done stuff where, to your point, where I added a line item and it didn't get caught into the sum, and it's like, oh right, you can't, like, the other thing about it is when you go to clients, for me, if I make a mathematical error, it's my problem. Like, once they've said yes to that and they saw the list of what we were going to do, I'm not going to go back and say, by the way, I didn't calculate that correctly. It's actually, you know, it's problematic. I mean, there's been a couple that were so big that we had to talk to them about it, but it's very, very rare. Go ahead, Craig, and then Rupert.
Yeah, I've just started using numbers for stuff like this. And one thing that I've found is a difference, or that I can't find compared to Excel, is how to lock cells and lock formulas. And from what I've seen, I don't know that you can. So that's a big sort of warning thing for me. But just to further on your last point, the ability to have a good idea of ballparking what a job should cost, just so you've got that number in your head, is really important, because, and I guess that mostly just comes from experience, but having that, then it's a really good thing. If what you're seeing on your spreadsheet doesn't line up with what you thought it was going to be ballpark, you know you've had a mistake somewhere. You know something's gone wrong.
Well, almost always, I think that something's going to be, in my head, I think it's going to be about half of what it ends up being. Like, I go, oh yeah, I think I can do that for $10,000, and it's actually going to be 20. You know, that's typically what happens when I open it up. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, with regards to costing out for renting out your own gear, which everyone should, because that is a hard cost. You need to think about what would be the lifespan of that piece of equipment, and not, when I say lifespan, it's not only when that piece of equipment will die. It would also be when it would be essentially treated as obsolete. Like, you know, especially with cameras nowadays, you know, it's a, you know, flavor of the month kind of thing. And the like the Blackmagic 6K, which everyone was raving about a year ago, now everyone's about the 6K Pro. So, you know, clients would be like, I want the latest and greatest. So you have to decide how long it would be before you would essentially fully depreciate the item, and also at what point there you want to ROI.
We call
typically
that
that
shelf
number.
life.
Typically, that number is somewhere between 10-1 to 100-1, depending on the durability and the lifespan of it. You know, and we can all talk about what it is, but it's somewhere usually in that range is what and you got to decide. Like, a tripod oftentimes runs at about 100-1. You know, like, it's because big heavy tripods will last for a long time. So you're renting a $15,000 tripod for $125 a day. You know, so those are the kind of things that, because it'll last for 20 years. You know,
that's one thing I love about sound equipment. It lasts so long that I could spread the load out so much longer than a camera or a lens.
Yeah, absolutely. Doug? and then Jan.
So I will be 100% transparent here that this is a part of our business and my personal growth in doing a business for 11 years that I have struggled with the most. And it's been really difficult to come, we started with one camera, one light kit, and a PC, and I had no idea what that costs. And now we have a 20-foot trailer.
Well,
with
you're doing something right. You're learning, but something's working.
But I pull up with our trailer and I'm like, okay, well, how much does that cost? And we bid a 3-camera shoot. And yet when I get there as a production guy and the guy that I love what I do. And, when I go, you know what, 2 more cameras would just make this show so much better. I just go do it. But
and I do that too. No,
yeah, and I just don't get. I mean, I love Chris Fenwick. This dude is got on me so much. Like, what is it to be you, Doug? Like, tell me. Like, and that's the hard part that I sometimes I don't know. And to get paid for what you love to do, I sometimes struggle to add that 0 to a spreadsheet. Like, you know what? I'm really worth 10,000, not 1,000. And because I would rather just do the job. Because doing the job,
there's a lot of us,
and
that's the hard part. Is a lot of us are passionate about what we do, and we'd rather we just want to get the job done. And I will admit that when I had a 10,000 foot square foot warehouse full of gear, as far as I was concerned, if it's not booked when we drive away, and I felt like throwing it in, I just throw it in. Like I would just throw, I would just be like, I want 2 extra cameras, or I want 3 extra things, or I want because what I knew is it became harder and harder and harder for our clients to not use us because we would, we were just dumping value into the project. Now I wouldn't do it if things were really busy. I'm not going to rent more gear to sort that out. But if I have the gear, and that's one of the advantages of owning the gear, is that, at one point I had 30 cameras, that were all, and they were all different sizes and shapes and things. And if I felt like a couple extra micros were going to be great in the ceiling or somewhere else, I just throw them in and wire them. It's just a matter of making sure that it didn't impact something else, or, places that I wouldn't put them is when I put them in danger. Clients someone want to take my F950 and slide it down a thing that was all covered in salt. And I was like, yeah, no, like we're not going to, so you do have to be careful when you're renting your own gear. You have to be really careful about it. And that's also what I think about when I rent other people's gear, is that other people weren't careful about it, because that's why people rent gear. The reason I used to rent skis is because I was going off the slope. So anyway, Jan and then Guy and then Bill.
I appreciate what you guys are saying right now. In a past life, when I was the head of the receivable management department of Dun & Bradstreet, the first thing that we would talk about is to manage expectations. Now, you guys are talking about 6K cameras, all of this, but the first thing that you've got to do is realize that the job is not complete until the money is in the bank. That's number one. Number two, you've got to manage your expectations. If you go to a client and you think you're going to be putting in $100,000 worth of gear, and this guy's only got a $10,000 budget, you've wasted your time. So the first thing that you need to do when you sit down with a client, if we're going to talk about billing and expectations, and we can get into billing and all of that, but the first thing that I would say is that you've got to understand 2 things. Number one is what's in his budget. And that's a little tricky because most people won't tell you what's really in their budget. And number 2, you've got to understand what the time frame is of the job. That's what I would say.
Yeah, time frame is huge. Because we definitely charge, everything costs more because everything has to be done, and you have a lower room for error. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, here locally we have Microsoft Studios, and internally they would produce videos, and some of these would just get out of hand. Like the request to change something would just go on and on and on and on. And so they started billing people internally $75 an hour just of make-up money. It's not real money. So we do the same thing where we just take a project. We have pre-production, production, post-production, delivery, and then we just times the $75 an hour. And then we just say, is this project worth it? And then we start to back it out and say, hey, no, this Diva ring light stand mounting video is going to take 17 hours. I think that's going to be about $1,275 in time. theoretically, we don't actually bill ourselves out this money, but it just helps people wrap their mind around what's going on and what this stuff costs. So it gives you an idea. And this is just a simple Google sheet that's then shared with the team, and they could meet and talk about these, so we don't get these cost overruns where somebody has a passion project that goes on for 80 hours, and it happens to the best of us. And if they want to, but they just got to be aware of what they're doing.
The thing that that I always warn people about too is when you when you do something for a nonprofit, even if they're paying you for it, you have to be super careful about nonprofits. Not because they're all good people doing good things, they're trying to make a difference, but because they have a large volunteer staff, they don't have any concept of time, because labor to them is free, and it is. They're just not conscious of it. It's not that they're not trying to take advantage of you, but they're not conscious of the fact that you're now churning through it. And to Guy's point, you get into this, really ugly situation where you never want to do that. And I generally will only work for free on things I'm really passionate about, because it's got to be something that I'm enjoying. I don't do it as a marketing thing or as a favor ever, because I just know it's going to be a lot of hours. But yeah, you have to be careful of that. The other thing we put in our contracts, this gets a little into billing, is when we do post-production in the contract, it'll say 2 or 3 rounds of non-recursive edits. So non-recursive edits. Now, we do this not because we don't do more occasionally, as Chris knows, for some people, for some groups, but in a general thing, we want it somewhere in the contract that just says that, so that we can say people know that they're getting a favor, or they're stretching it, as opposed to just asking for it, and feeling like it's. You want to set up a situation in the contract. You still have fluidity, but you want to set it up like people don't feel like you owe it to them. That you're going to make it an exception for them, and they know it, rather than feeling like you owe them that, because it's just a different mentality. Go ahead, Bill, and then Chris, and then Rupert.
I just wanted to address part of what Doug was saying, because I think none of us got into this, and none of us certainly sustained doing this kind of work unless we did love it, because it's technically challenging, it's very hard, takes a lot of time. It's frustrating along the way as things don't work out the way you project them to, and then you have to struggle to learn to get to the next level. But love and sustainability are 2 different things, and I've learned more and more time as I've gone through my career that if you don't pay attention to some of these, you can get yourself in a situation where you can't sustain doing what you love, because you're not taking care of the business portion of it. When I was really young in my business starting out, I went to a Chamber of Commerce free seminar, and they were talking about depreciation and amortization and all these things that are part of the science of business, that if you ignore them and you don't understand that, hey, you got a new camera, you're excited about the camera, but in 4 years, it's going to be worth 1/10 of what you purchased it, and you're going to need to buy a new camera. And if you don't set aside the depreciation amounts to get a new camera, you're going to be out of business. You're going to have to look for money to buy a new camera, and you haven't put it away over time. So that's not a good idea. So all of those things say at the bottom line, what you love doesn't necessarily feed your retirement.
Go ahead,
and
Chris,
if you want those things, you got to do that.
A close cousin to sustainability, Bill, is scalability. And a lot of people in a small business, if you think about, Doug, for example, like the beginning of your career, you had that camera, you had that thing, you shot the thing, you did the deal, you probably had to transfer stuff. You probably weren't charging for like transferring data, because it's like, well, I'm just here. I'm just going to hit the thing. I'm just going to transfer. And in small businesses, quite often there's a lot of things that we do that we're not charging for. The problem with that is when that little business gets to be a medium business or a big business, there's tons of things that we're not getting charged for that now you actually will have to hire somebody to do, because there's not enough hours in your day to just sort of pick up the slack. Think about a business. Alex will probably had multiple people managing that 10,000 square foot warehouse. Right. I need you to load this stuff. Where in the beginning, some of those first, you've told us stories about walking down Market Street with a cart with a bunch of stuff on it, heading over to Moscone.
Catering cart.
Yeah.
Catering cart.
So
That's how I started.
That's not scalable. That's not sustainable. So eventually you had to hire people. So in the beginning, if you say, well, it took me 2 hours of my time to transfer all that data, you need to know that. And that's what I talk about, the true cost of being you.
Well,
and then it's scalable.
And to your point, like for rental, when people say, well, why are you renting the gear that you've had this for years, you probably paid it off. I'm like, well, someone still has to pack it and they still have to put it together and they still have to maintain it. And it's still not going to last, like, and it has to be replaced. And those are all things that are all part of that cost structure.
And you didn't rent it to just, collect stuff. This is a business. I'm going to charge for this until I can't charge for it.
Right. And there's storage and everything else. And again, what I do is I usually tuck under the market rate so that if it's, if you want to go, because I'll just go, if you want to rent it from somewhere else, you can pay more and it'll be less stable. And I'll look, and when it breaks and your stream doesn't work, I'll look at you going, I told you. Yeah, go ahead, Rupert. And then Sky.
Just going back to the non-profit work, if you do end up doing some of that, either at a lower price or as donated work or something like that, often they'll let you take that as a donation to them, and you can claim that as a deduction or write it off on your taxes or something like that.
Definitely keep track of it and charge them. Typically, what we would do is charge a nonprofit full rate and then donate what we took off of it for them, even if it's all of it.
Yep.
But the point is that you really want to have in paper and have them accept that as this is what we did there. Go ahead, Sky, and then Guy, and then Doug.
The word value you used earlier, the concept of R&D, Doug, to your point of how do we start out with something? I know I bought my Lumix 10 years ago because I needed to get back into understanding and getting my muscle memories. And that allowed me to get Aputure and an f-stop and back into a lexicon that is natural and easy at the end of my fingertips. And Chris Fenwick, you had me at Tucker, brother, why didn't we have this, Alex? I guess the only disappointment is that we didn't have this conversation a year ago. But the passion has brought me to this point. My muscles are very strong in a whole lot of areas that I had no idea I needed to learn about. So I'm teasing when I say I wish we would have had this conversation a year ago. But the sustainability factor is, I'm moving into a whole different, not just sustainable, but scalable opportunity. And I'm very grateful, and I'm learning a whole lot from Guy, and it's his fault.
All right, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I love that everything's changing so fast with this AWS stuff, because what people don't think about is the depreciation of these high-end computers. Like some of these Mac Pros, I mean, you're kicking up $10,000, $20,000. But if you're just editing a project, our editor went to edit something that we did a Zoom session interview with Michael Cioni, and she's in her apartment and she downloads this like 8 gigabytes of files and she puts it on her time, like, here's what I was doing. And I was like, oh my God, I could have just fired up an AWS instance, installed Premiere on it, had you edit it in the cloud and kick it back out. So it never touches her actual hard drive locally. It just stays up in the cloud. And then it goes sideways back, to wherever the deliverable needs to go. So she never actually downloads anything. And it would have saved like 4 times the amount of time. So people should really be thinking about the IT infrastructure, the depreciation of that fast computer, because AWS, you need a new instance. You just say stop. Get the new one that you want. You want 32, 64, 128 gigs of RAM, click, boom, and you got a new computer. Just relaunch and you got more. So if you're thinking about the future and how you could run this stuff.
Latency, if it depends on the complexity of the edit and the latency of your internet connection. But you're absolutely right. When it works really well.
Well, with Teradek, all it is just the pixels that are transferring. So it's not, it's different than like RDP.
Like at my home, it doesn't work really well, and at my office, it works really well. Like it's like another computer.
But Guy, as a retailer,
that's been my experience. Is like on Comcast home, like non-business Comcast.
You gotta try Teradek. It'll blow your mind.
I've done it with Teradek, and I've been the frame drops drive me a little nuts. Just little frame drops that it's probably something in my network infrastructure, but at the office, it's like just opening another computer somewhere.
Yeah, like it feels local to me. Yeah. Doug,
and then Jan.
Yeah. So getting back to like growing and doing that from the beginning, we still have clients that we had from day one, and it's been tough that, we were like the dance kings for a while, just dance recitals, just dance recitals, making DVDs. We're still doing that, but now I bring up this big truck, but that just helps me. But it's hard to get these clients to now see, like, what, we're much better now this is what we cost now, not back then, because all of our business has been word of mouth and reoccurring. And now it's like, hey, we need to raise our rates. And they're like, what?
So we almost never raise rates on current clients. Like it's just like I think about it when I do it, it's become for us, it's become really difficult, and we sometimes will. And it's one of the advantages of not having line items through the whole thing is that the next job is just a little bit more. But if they're doing exactly the same thing, we kind of commit to ourselves if they're doing exactly the same thing and just expecting the same piece, even though we're putting in more hardware and people and everything else, that's our problem, and we have to make sure that, and now sometimes I won't be the one that shows up at the show anymore. Like, if it, like we've now systematized it. What we hope to do is if we're doing the same thing for the same client, we can systematize that experience. And then I can hire people that are sometimes a little less expensive than the ones that had to figure it out. And so that becomes something that we try to find efficiencies, in lower than amount of time. But I find that there's always, when I think of how I do work in general and how I work with clients, I think of, there's what I'm doing right now. Let's see if I go over this way. There's what I'm doing right now. And then there is the stuff I'm trying to get rid of and the stuff that I want to do aspirationally as a business. And it used to be as a freelancer, as an employee, I would go from one company to another this way. As a freelancer, I would do it. In the company, I'm always doing this. So this is what pays the bills. This is usually, 60 to 80% of my business is what I'm doing now. This over here is probably 20%, maybe a little bit more. And then this up here is usually 0 to 10% of what I'm doing. This is what used to be here. And this is what used to be here. And so I'm constantly like a tank track, just going like this through industries, through processes, from one thing to another. I'm constantly moving the thing that I wanted to do over here, over here. And then the thing that I was doing, I move over here. And this is stuff. And then after that, I kick it to the curb typically, or I make it so commoditized that I don't have to think about it anymore. But what for me invariably happens is that once I take this, there's another one over here, another one over here. So this is, if we think about that picture, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm trying to get rid of. And I just look at this as a path that I'm just going to keep on going on. And I can tell you what I want to do for the next 20 years. And this one is a step towards this one, and this one is a step towards this one. And I'm constantly just moving along. And I've moved from, a promotions intern at Prime Sports Network, or, to what we're doing now, by just taking one step at a time. But I don't lose track of what pays the bills. What's really easy is to get so obsessed with what's coming ahead that you lose track of what is paying the bills. And you have to stay focused on, and sometimes that makes that aspirational one more difficult to get to. Go ahead, Jan, and then Chris.
I am not a CPA, and I would highly recommend that before you start taking charitable deductions of things you're doing with charities, that you talk to your CPA, because to the best of my knowledge, in-kind donations don't count. Also, I wanted to ask the panel regarding billing. Do you guys get a 50% deposit, or how do you collect the money? What do you do when you finally do bill the client? How do you get paid? And I want to say one more thing. You guys were talking about growth. I just want to say one of the biggest mistakes business makes is they grow too fast. They have this thing, they don't think it out. They buy a lot of gear. Next thing they know, they're in serious debt and they can't survive. But billing is the key to staying alive. So how do you guys do your billing?
The second biggest mistake they make is to grow too slow and get past. So it's like the THX thing. The number one upset in THX is that the number one call is that the audio is too loud, and the number two call was the audio is too soft. So it is a happy medium between those two. Go ahead, Chris. Oh, well, and what I'd say, Jen, before we go to Chris, I'm sure something different. I don't know how other people do the billing or do billing. I want 25% up front typically, and then I want 50. I want to get 50% somewhere before. Now with a live event, if it's live, with corporate, all of this changes because corporate can't manage it that way. You have to set up in the SOW moments that are billable moments that can be done. And then you know that you'll wait 40 to 60 days. 10 days is not, or 15 days or immediate is not practical. Like they can't pivot that way when you get into large corporate. Generally though, once I get to if I've worked with a company that I have an MSA and they're a large, like Fortune 10, I'm not too worried. It's I'm going to get paid, as long as I don't screw the job up, I'm going to get paid. I don't know when, I know it'll be, but you also have to think about your bill outs, like what you're promising other people. That's where, it's when people bill you want them to be on a 45-day turn because you're not going to have the money to pay them, up front. So that you have to think about that. And when you're doing tons of corporate work, you have to think about that. Now, when I work with someone new, I won't give terms to anyone that I haven't done 3 jobs well with. So, the company will do it differently, but when I did it all with Pixelcore, I need 3 jobs to go well before I'll give you terms. Otherwise, I need 100% before the job before we do the live event. Before I come on site, I need 100% upfront. And again, I've had a handful of good. I want to. Sometimes I sound pretty hard about this. I've had a handful of good jobs in LA that have worked out well, in Hollywood and LA and Southern California. But I've had enough other jobs that if I don't know you and I haven't worked with you, I need to be paid 100% upfront 10 days out. Like I won't even buy the flights, down if I don't have the money. And I am like, I will let you burn. like you'll say, but we got to do the job. And I'm like, I don't have to do anything until I have the final check and it's in the bank and I see it, because it's just been this, it's not that I don't get paid. It's that it doesn't get done. And then after the job, I get a whole bunch of people wanting to negotiate the price down after the job is complete. And that's a really common thing in LA that I take personally. It's not that it's just business after that. It's like, I just did a great job and now I'm negotiating whether I'm going to get paid or not, or how much I'm going to get paid. And so I know that I'm constantly doing this, but LA is just you have to be super on your game, to do it. There are good people in LA that I've done work with, that I love doing work with and everything else, but there are, I would say 85-90% chance you're going to get someone that's going to ring you out. And so it's just part of the culture. It's just there are good people in LA. I'm not saying that there aren't, but they are few and far between. And the rest of it is pretty much a pit of vipers that you just have to really be careful of. In corporate is way easier. I just will tell you that as someone who's worked in it, like I would never go back to making films. Like, to be honest, I would do them only if I did them on my own terms, because corporate is from a business perspective is a way easier thing to manage. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, that pit of vipers is where I started in this business, and to learn that it was a business was hard, because I am a passionate person and come from theater. So to understand that when moving out of that,
and I was about to go to Chris, and then Chris disappeared. Chris, can you hear us?
Chris, he's delivering his wife's coffee. The pit of vipers point is the commodity that is mystified is that the commodity in Los Angeles is the story, just like it was in New York. It was the story is the product, and that's the part that is so confusing, because in Los Angeles they get that they're going to try to get it for as cheap as they can get.
Yeah.
When we work for Microsoft, Starbucks, Boeing, the product is a coffee bean, an airplane, a piece of software, and they use the same business practices, but the story is in support of the product. Versus Los Angeles, the product is the story, and that's a hard one to get your head around and it took me about 10 years to figure that one out.
Let's jump to Talak's question.
Talak in New York says, is there a good way to work with vendors for rental and purchase to persuade them to break things down more granularly? Because often I'm getting quotes for companies for something that they will pay me or not. They will pay for, not me, sorry. I'm wishing to myself to look at the low and high options to present.
So this is the opposite end of what we were talking about earlier, which is that we don't want to do that because we just know that it won't be that. We don't like being tagged down because we just know that it'll be a moving target. Like there's going to be a bunch of requests that aren't there. We're going to end up moving from one box to another. A lot of times we're giving up revenue on one place I'll save money on hotels and spend it on lenses, or I'll save, and so when you start, line items become this really complicated thing. So I think that's the hard part is, I like to very explicitly say what I'm going to do and then just say, this is the number for it. As Bill was showing earlier, once I get into the line items that are all there, that becomes this process where you actually get a less of a job, out of it. But if you know what you're looking at, definitely working through what are the different options, I think makes sense. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, and like at least from my point of view, you're hiring me and my company and my team because we know what we're doing. Like if I line item every single thing, like an antenna splitter, if they nitpick that and they take it out, they're handicapping me and my ability to do the job right.
Yep, absolutely. And you get a lot of pushback because we know that no one's going to remember the conversation about taking that antenna splitter out. They're just going to remember that it didn't work. And that is the thing so when people say they don't want to give up the things that are in the line items, those things may seem more expensive, but those are the things that make the show work. And that's the person that's going to make that work. And so when you say, oh, I just want to pull this out, what generally happens when we do line items and people say, we don't need this, we don't need this, we don't need this, there is always an email from me going, these are the things that can go wrong. And oh, by the way, everything else can go wrong if you take those out, because if I have to spend more time looking at this, I'm not looking at everything else in the job, and we're going to be distracted by something because this is harder. So I basically, if you take something out of my line item that I put in there, I thought about it a lot when I put it in there. If you pull it out, you're going to get an email from me that basically in writing says that I'm not accountable for anything. That I will throw you under the bus the moment anything goes wrong, because now I don't like failing, so it doesn't really affect things. But I put an email out like, you start pulling these things out, or you don't give us enough load in time, or you change things here. I'm basically telling you that in writing that, and usually it comes as an alert, like, hey, we're really concerned. This is what's going to go wrong. These are all the things that can go wrong, including everything. Because that's, to Mickey's point, people pulling stuff out that doesn't look necessary to them is necessary to us. And to Mickey's point, you always hire people that you can trust, or try to. Go ahead, Matt. I can't hear you.
Sorry. I think as all of us talk about, it's also vendor relations more than anything else. We want to do what is done to us. So, it's the golden rule. And we have to be willing to say, okay, well, this person they're worthy of it. And that's what the bottom line goes to. But we need to also have good relationships with those vendors also. We can't just, if we're not willing to dig deep with the vendor and go the distance with them, then you probably shouldn't have them as a vendor also.
Yeah. And yeah, I take it. We do the best we can of making sure that everyone's taken care of around us, because it's just, you have to keep working with them. Other than just being a good feeling, you have to keep working with them, and you always have to treat it like an ecosystem, so we do everything we can. Unless we're under a lot of budget pressure, we don't start nickel and diming, folks. We trust that it is what they said it was going to be. Go ahead, Rupert, and then Bill.
So as much as we want good vendors, we also want to be good customers. As vendors ourselves, I've never been afraid to fire a customer or to decide that that's somebody I don't want to do business with. So we have to appreciate that our vendors have the same right towards us. Also, on the line item point, I'd say that if you are having to work at a line item level and you are in an ERP system or something like that, you can actually build all those relationships of line items in terms of like dependencies, where if you take one out, it alerts you to the fact, well, that's actually going to affect this, this, and this.
Yeah. And you can build even some of those in spreadsheets. It just takes a little bit more work than the ERP system. Yeah, go ahead, Bill, and then Jan.
That's exactly why I did that FileMaker form that I showed you first, because the interdependencies are baked into it. And it's great because if somebody says, okay, this is too much, I think I can probably hit this number, I would open up my laptop, pull that thing up and say, okay, well, what do you want to do? Should we start taking out cameras or days or what? And they go, well, let's try to do this in 2 days instead of 3 days. And so I just changed the number from 3 to 2 days, hit the number. It changes everything in the thing. Are we at your target number? Now, if we've taken a day out, I have to have the conversation of, look, we have a shot list. It has 35 shots over the course of 3 days. How many shots can we lose if we're only going to be cut back to 2 days? And that's going to affect all the other things in there. So you have a way to talk to them to show them that their decisions are having a direct impact on the bottom line in real time. That's why I love that system. And again, I would never give them more than that quotation page and say, okay, now we've gone from 35,000 to 24, but here's what you don't get from the original quote.
Go ahead, Jan, and then Sky.
When you're going backwards that way, I mean, it seems to me that, all right, I'm hiring Lindsay, just for an example. And Alex, this is what I've got. This is what I have. I have a project that's going to do this, this, and this. I want to hire Lindsay to come in, give me the budget. I don't want to know about how many tape machines you're bringing in. I don't want to know about the cable. All I want to know is I'm hiring you and I want a good job. I want to be proud and I want to know that you've got my back. Isn't that why advertising agencies are hired? Because the corporate people don't want to take the responsibility if a campaign doesn't go well. Isn't that the same?
Well, part of it. Yeah. A lot of times, so we do more line items now than we did in the past. I used to be ruthless about it. I mean, I think for up until a year ago, I probably submitted 5 line items ever, and out of 2,000 events. You know, like it was just, and I really wanted to do the job because usually I would just say no, we won't do it, and it was just like, this is the line item. And my reasoning for it is that I really wanted to move away from a service to a product. So I'm like, the product, I'm going to build you a product, and they were like, I don't understand. I said, well, when you go to an Italian restaurant, do you ask them how much they're paying the chef and how much they're paying for the wheat and how much they're paying for the tomatoes and what's the rent on the space and what is the, you're not asking that. You just want to know how much the spaghetti is. And in this case, I said, in this case, the spaghetti is $16,000 and it's really good, but that, I want to build a product for people that is a bespoke product, but it's not something that they necessarily need to know how all those little bits and pieces go, because there's definitely places that I lose money. And then there's things that I, do well on and and there's all these back and forths. And when you reduce it down to a service, you actually don't produce as good the work isn't as good, because again, you're stuck in this line item. Well, I line item this out and people are paying attention and they're pulling all these things. And if you work with a client that'll let you move those things around, it works out better. But, it makes it pretty hard. Go ahead, Sky, and then Bill.
That was kind of the magic answer before I even asked my question. What is your ROI to the client? If we're there to make them look good, and that's why they're hiring us, how is our value to helping their business do better? If that is our attitude, then I love that you've simplified that by creating a product. And again, that you used the food analogy is always near to my heart, but that, and again, I didn't know anything about food, let alone video. I mean, I know a lot about video production, but I knew how to get a receipt, but until I started hanging out with Graham Care.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Bill.
So in the beginning of your career, you generally don't have the option of working with the C-suite and top executives. When you work your way up to that level, yes, they can just say, I want it. I don't care what it is. Make it great. And the Alex kind of environment is exactly what happens. Below that, as you're working your way up to be trusted by the organization so that you can work with their C-suite executives, you will often be working with middle managers, department heads, sometimes SVPs. They all have to justify their numbers up the chain, and they have to go through finance usually. Those are the people who are going to vet your proposals and say, does this make sense? Do your numbers add up? And sometimes they will get from their top people, no, the budget at the level you're proposing is not going to work for us. It needs to be 30% less than that to work in our numbers to make our quarterly goals. So that's why you have to do all this stuff. It's great when you get up to the C-suite and, Bob's the CEO and Bob says, I want to do this and it's got to be 4 days and we all have A-list accommodations. You go, great. and you say, you know, somebody questions you, you say, well, Bob wants this. That's it. The discussion's over. That's how corporate works.
Yeah, go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, just to add to that, your how you position yourself and the market that you put yourself into will help decide like at what the place you can price your services, your teams, and your equipment. Um, going to Doug's conundrum, like you have to reach a point, I think, that you're not afraid to lose your current clientele, or at least treat them as a a nice hobby as opposed to your main bread and butter.
Yeah, I mean, you really want to get to a point, and I wasn't. I will admit, to the point where I was able to demand a lot. I also spent most of my time with an enormous amount of my minimum requirement with Pixel Core was so 090 is much more sane, than I, so 090 has a smaller nut. In Pixel Core, I had to make $500,000 a month, period. Like it had to come in every month, or it wasn't, or I couldn't make payroll. And when you get into that, to get back to what I think Jan was talking about, is growing too fast. We had to grow really, really fast, but once we had that, as long as it kept coming in, it was great. But if I did it again, I'd probably grow a little bit slower. It was hard because the opportunity, the issue you get into with companies is, especially on a big corporate company like Google, they have a very strong demand for growth. And if you can't figure it out, they'll hire other people that can. And then they're making a bunch of, so you want to suck up all of that. Like I made a choice not to grow to 200 employees to support Hangouts early on. And then they hired a bunch, they hired 200 people. And, it had two problems. One is I probably could have built a bunch of infrastructure that would have been interesting for other things. Number two is they had a lot of people doing a lot of bad work. Like it was a really kind of and it screwed up the whole platform, And so I think that's the challenge, is that you don't want to, you want to be able to eat everything in front of you, but you can't. And to Mickey's point is, the closer you can get to being able to just say no to things that don't work. Like I'm much more in that position now than I've ever been in my entire life, where I can just say no to things. And we just have stuff come in and I just go, yeah, I'm not, we had one with a client, just, it's clear that they didn't care about the quality of the audio or the video in the meeting. Like they were just checking off that they're going to do it. They didn't want to spend anything on that. And I just said, I don't think we're the right client. We're not the right vendor for you. Like that's not, like, we're not going to, it just doesn't make sense for us to do it. And it felt really good, I have to admit, to be able to say that, like to be able to like not spend 2 weeks of my life working on something that wasn't going to turn out. And I think that you do as a company want to find ways to get to that point, whether it's spending a little less on things, being more efficient. How you do that is figuring out a way to get there so that you can keep on taking on the jobs that are going to move you forward, as opposed to just a lot of busy work. Jan, and then Mickey.
Another mistake a lot of people make in business is they depend on one client. And that is the surefire disaster method, because if you lose that one client, you lose everything. So the most important thing that you could do is build out your base as wide as possible.
Or
Get
one,
as many clients as you can, as quickly.
Or one platform. Like, for instance, what got me in trouble was that at the time I had lots of different clients, and they were all big clients, and it was all big contracts, but it was all based on Facebook Live. So when things went, sideways in one platform, even though I had a lot of clients, it didn't protect me. So you have to be careful of, diversification of that as well. All right. We have, oh, go ahead, Mickey, real quick.
I got it.
Oh yeah.
And then we're going to close up.
Yeah. Like, I mean, in business, you all, of course, have to make revenue. You have to pay the bills, your cost of goods, your OPEX. But it's not always, it could be, you could position it so it's not always about the monetary compensation. Everyone has to be compensated somehow. But say if you get compensated by learning, a new service that you can offer, a new skill, or you get compensated by widening your network. Those are other ways of thinking about being compensated.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I do that all the time. I'm interested in a market. Like I've been interested in cooking since we did the MasterChef stuff 6 or 7 years ago. We're spending a lot of energy on Mad in the Kitchen out of the fact that I'm interested in that model and I'm trying to figure it out, and it just happens to be the right place at the right time for everybody else, is that we're trying to figure that out. What makes sense, what works, what doesn't work. And so the other thing to know is that when you do things for little or nothing, it's a safer place to experiment. And so when you do it when you're getting paid a lot of money, there's lawsuits and stuff like that when it doesn't work. When you do it on your own, you have a little bit more room to work. All right, I'm going to close it up. We'll jump into the post show. Thank you to our producers. Incredible work today. Not a lot of questions in the second hour, but it was a fun conversation. We were able to just have a philosophical bounce around. Incredible work in the first hour. There was a lot of questions there. We as panelists have to keep on learning to be more succinct when we have that many questions in. So we're kind of going to a new norm that we're still figuring out. And I'm getting a little rougher with folks to kind of pull it in tight. But we have to keep it tight on the panelist side. But it's good. But everyone's doing really well. So anyway, so thanks so much. Again, great day. And tomorrow, MixPre. Bring your MixPres. Be ready to talk about MixPres. We're going to have a lot of fun.
Tonight?
And tonight, also tonight is general quick Q&A. So we'll start that at 6. So tonight is general Q&A from 6. We'll open the doors at 6, 6:30 to 8 is when we're doing that. All right. We will see you all soon. See you all in the post show for those of you jumping. All right. See you later.